Hello and welcome to Israelite Creation in Context, Part 1. I'd like to begin our course with a quotation from Dr. John Walton, who is professor of Old Testament at Wheaton College. And in a book titled The Lost World of Genesis 1, which I would recommend to every student of this course, Walton begins by saying something very interesting that I think that we should all keep in mind as we go forward in dealing with the first few chapters of Genesis. Walton says that the Bible, quote, was written for us and for all humankind, but it was not written to us. It was written to Israel. It is God's revelation of himself to Israel, and secondarily, through Israel, to everyone else. I think understanding Genesis rightly is to understand it in its original Israelite context, and to realize that the point of its writing was to inform the people of ancient Israel, and only first when we understand that can we branch out to map on Genesis for meaning for modern readers today. Because when it comes to creation, we modern thinkers have a lot of information to sift through. Not only have contemporary readers inherited the Bible's ancient creation account, but scientific research offers observational data about the origins of matter and the workings of the natural world that sometimes conflict with what readers see in Genesis, or at least what readers think they see. And we're going to distinguish between what is actually on the page and what it would have meant in an ancient Israelite context from what modern readers might think they see when they take the text out of context. This course is concerned with rightly understanding the text of the Bible. It is not a science class. Therefore, if possible, as a student of this course, try to set aside any presuppositions around what science says about the origins of existence, the universe, evolution, genetics, DNA, or other biological phenomena. Resist the urge to align Scripture's view of creation with modern scientific concepts. The Bible's ancient Israelite authors did not use these scientific categories, so when modern readers employ them to talk about God or the Bible, they do a disservice to the original intent of the biblical data. For our purposes, there are only two data sets, or reservoirs of information, that matter to us in this course. One, of course, is Israel's scriptures, that is the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and the second are other ancient Near Eastern texts that offer a window into how the ancient Israelites would have understood the world and how God would have communicated to the ancient people of Israel. Now, these other ancient Near Eastern texts, they're not religiously authoritative for Bible readers, nor are they on par with the Bible in terms of divine revelation. Instead, think of these other ancient Near Eastern texts as what I would like to call tools for cultural translation. These texts will help us to culturally translate the ancient scriptures of Israel. So, thinking of the ancient Near Eastern texts as translational tools in the close study of Israel's Bible, I think is a good way to approach it. So those are the two main data sets: the Bible, Israel's scriptures, and then other texts that would have been made around Israel at the time. This will help us to understand Israel, even though, of course, these ancient Near Eastern texts aren't to be, again, put on the same level as the Bible or anything like that. They are cultural translation tools, and we will need them to rightly understand the original context of Genesis. So just to summarize, since the Bible was written to ancient Israel, all other readers must translate not only the Hebrew language, but also the original Israelite culture and worldview. Readers must understand both the linguistic and the cultural cues of ancient Israel before they will understand the information on the biblical page. That is, we need the historical and cultural and linguistic background of this text in order to make any sense of it at all. The notion that a reader would just come up to the text without any prior knowledge of Genesis 1 and start trying to figure out how best to interpret that, it just doesn't take seriously enough the true import of the ancient Israelite background of this material. One of the keys for us to culturally translate the biblical text is to understand why the Bible, something like Genesis or certainly other texts in the Bible, why they would have been written in the first place. Often, modern readers, whether they're religious or not, approach the Bible as though its purpose is to provide information for our own historical edification. That is, history for history's sake. In other words, that the Bible's just giving readers and believers information for the sake of it, so that they understand history or they understand the past or something like that. Again, I call this history for history's sake. But on the contrary, the goal of Genesis and the rest of the Bible is not to give history for history's sake. Instead, it's to tell the people of ancient Israel why certain information matters for their relationship with God and with each other. So let me give you an example of this kind of cultural translation project that we need to embark on as we approach Genesis. If you were visiting London, England today, and a native Londoner wanted to meet with you in the city, that person, that Londoner, might tell you to, quote, top up your oyster with a few quid, take the tube to the Strand, and we'll see you on the apples next to Nelson's column. If you're unfamiliar with the British language and culture, you might think that you've been asked to feed some Latin words to your pet shellfish, bring a cylindrical object to an unraveling ball of yarn, and look out for an architect named Nelson near a pile of fruit. Of course, you've not been told this. You've been told something very specific, but you need to know not only the language, but the cultural translation behind it. In fact, what you've just been told is to add some money to your public travel card, take the underground train to a particular city district near the River Thames, and meet on the stairs under the monument to Admiral Horatio Nelson in Trafalgar Square, which is this image that you see right here on the right. So what may sound strange to one hearer makes perfect sense to another. But the only way for that to make perfect sense is to know the linguistic and cultural cues behind what we're being told. The same is true for the ancient Israelite Bible. So again, the same principle holds here. When we're approaching the narrative of Genesis chapter 1, we need to approach it and translate it culturally. English readers come up to the first chapter of the Bible, and they do so with a host of their own cultural presuppositions. But these might not be the correct assumptions from an ancient Israelite perspective. The Hebrew words and ideas might have meanings with which we are unaware, but rightly translating them is crucial for understanding the intended message of Genesis 1. Now, just a quick word, an aside. Now, knowing the Bible's original cultural context, which is what I've been talking about so far, is not the same thing as decoding the text or reading scripture symbolically. The goal is not to search for some hidden or spiritual meaning behind the Hebrew words. The words have plain and readily identifiable meanings. In the London example that we just looked at, the tube is another name for a well-known subterranean transportation system that's been around since 1863. The tube is not a primordial pathway of an extraterrestrial spaceship. So that is, the word tube, although someone who doesn't know London's culture and context might not know that the tube is actually a name for the underground railway system, what it certainly is not is a pathway to get to an extraterrestrial spaceship. So that is, the tube doesn't symbolize some strange, other symbolic meaning. The tube means the underground railway system. It's plain and readily identifiable, but we need to get behind it in order to rightly culturally translate it.
What Bible do you read? And how do you know it's the right one?
There's only one version of the Bible, right?
It might surprise you to learn that Bible translations led to many versions of Holy Scripture. Long ago, translators interpreted the Hebrew Bible, ensuring it would be enjoyed in many languages. But when they encountered Hebrew words they didn't understand, translators relied on their individual cultural context and used different words with different meanings unrelated to the original ones. This led to Bible versions that lacked the full, beautiful, original explanations becoming part of our history. That's why when you join our online classes, you'll get back to the source of the original Hebrew Bible to uncover hidden meanings.
Get back to the source. Join our online course today, where the treasures of the authentic Bible await you.
Click on the link and register to start your biblical experience.